Hello and good evening again to Changing World Conversations with the University of Edinburgh. It's in conjunction with the COP26 conference in Glasgow later. We're looking at questions around sustainability, around the environment, around the planet that we're living on, the planet that we're damaging, and the planet that we look to sustain us. And this evening we're talking about, I guess it's everyone's favourite topic really, it's food, isn't it? I mean, we all like food. I like food. I like lots of food. Do you like food, Andrea?
I love food.
Alistair, how are you on the food question?
Yeah, not too bad.
Ah, excellent. And you, how are you?
I'm a massive foodie.
Yeah, massive food. Massive, that's what I like, massive foodie. So we're looking at the future of food. What are we going to grow? What are we going to eat? So I've got here the A-team. I shall find out in just a second. So I'm going to introduce you to Dr Alistair McCormick. What's your job title?
So I'm a plant synthetic biologist in training. So my research lab focuses on plant synthetic biology. We're really interested in photosynthesis and the processes of how it works, and I suppose exploiting it for useful purposes. So we're quite interested in taking things like algae genes and putting them to higher plants to make them grow better and make them more robust. And you can take those kinds of tools and put them into crops and fields and make them more robust.
Is algae that slimy green stuff that you get in water?
Exactly.
Yeah, but you're not asking me to eat it, are you, darling?
Well, just the genes inside, once we put them into plants.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were getting on so well. And Dr Annis Richardson, am I pronouncing your first name correctly?
Yes. Yeah.
And what would you say your job title is?
I am the lecturer in molecular crop sciences at the University of Edinburgh.
Molecular crop sciences?
Yeah.
You want to grow molecular crops? Or?
No, so my lab studies how the genes in cereal crops like maize and barley control how they grow and the shape that they are when they're mature, and how that affects grain yield and the grain quality.
Barley? In
barley, yeah. So whiskey.
Yes! Lightening up already. And yourself, Professor Andrea Wilson. Am I saying that? Wilson?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And now, give us the full title.
I'm Professor of Infectious Disease Genetics and Modelling at the Roslin Institute, so I'm an animal scientist. My background actually is mathematics, so I like to work with data and I like to build mathematical models. And the questions we try to address is like, how can we use new breeding technologies to make our farm animal populations more resilient to disease or climate change so that they can produce nutritious food with low environmental footprint.
Fabulous. So let me just get this straight. I'm just going to recap on that for you there. So we've got meat, okay, we've got algae that can be turned into, green stuff beside the meat, and we've got whiskey. Basically, we have a balanced diet right here. And I'm your host, I'm Susan Morrison, and you're watching us on YouTube, where there is a chat box function. Now, if you ask a question, want to ask a question of the panel, please just put the question into the chat box function, and what happens is magically, by the power of technology, it appears here on my iPad, and I can put it to the panel here, and we can discuss the future of our favourite subject, which is food. Now, it's not just you, though. There are whole teams of people looking at the future of the resilience of the sustainability of the food that we depend on. So, well, they couldn't all come with you because social distancing and all that, but so we actually have them, though. They can introduce themselves, and what they've done is they've created a video for us to watch. So let's meet the rest of the teams.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Williams. I'm a third-year PhD student at the Institute of Molecular Plant Science.
I am Beatriz Rosa. I am new group leader at the University of Edinburgh, and we work in the Institute of Plant Science.
My name is Simon Lullico, and I'm a research scientist at the Roslin Institute.
My name is Dan McQueen, and I'm a professor at the Roslin Institute working on the biology and genetics of farmed fish species, such as salmon and trout.
Hi, I'm Nikki Atkinson. I'm a postdoc in the McCormick lab at the Institute for Molecular Plant Sciences here at the University of Edinburgh.
I'm Jacqueline Smith, and I work at the Roslin Institute in Edinburgh, and also as part of the Centre for Tropical Livestock Genetics and Health.
I'm Dr Emily Clark. I'm a research group leader at the Roslin Institute, and my work focuses on understanding the genetic code or building genetic maps of farmed animals, particularly sheep and goats. Those genetic maps, we can use that information from to understand their genome or the points on the map and how that controls their outward characteristics.
My area of research is try to understand the dynamic interaction between pathogens and crops, and I focus in barley and the fungal pathogen, Puccinia.
I study the immune system of plants after they've been harvested.
My area of expertise is in genomics. This, generally speaking, involves using big data sets that allow us to study the complete DNA code of an organism to try and understand how genes are affecting biological traits. For example, how a fish is able to fight off an infection.
And I'm working on a project where we're aiming to turbocharge photosynthesis, and to do this we're taking components from the green algae, aquatic algae, and putting them into land plants to try and build a CO2 concentrating mechanism.
I investigate the DNA of chickens and try to understand the genes involved in resilience. So that could be genes that make chickens more resistant to disease or better adapted to their environment.
My research interests centre around using gene editors to make small changes to the DNA of livestock species such as cattle, pigs and sheep, with the aim of either making more accurate models of human disease states so that we can test therapies, or to provide alternative solutions to farming challenges that can't be easily met with standard breeding techniques.
Fascinating stuff. I'm particularly impressed by the fact they managed to get that green wall to grow, because I've tried it over and over again with varying degrees of failure. Mainly damp lettuces. It wasn't good. We've actually got questions coming in already, but just very quickly before we go ahead with this, the research that's going into food, has there ever been a time when people have been looking so closely at how food is grown and how it's developed and how it's harvested? I'm just wondering, Alistair, because you're in plant synthetic biology, so you're actually trying to create new plants, or?
Absolutely, yeah. But not new plants in terms of shape and size, but just making plants a bit better at doing what they already do. So we have been growing plants to better varieties have been coming out in plants for the last, for the 10,000 years we've been breeding plants. So if you look at the Green Revolution, we've been using crossing varieties and various newer techniques, I suppose, to get better and better varieties to keep track with our growing population. But synthetic biology is just a way to augment that by allowing us to go straight to the genes of interest that we could target for getting plants to grow bigger or being more robust to the environment that they're growing in.
So essentially, and we have been doing this for a long time, now we're just doing it with microscopes.
Effectively, we're looking at the genetic code. So we've got the book that tells us exactly how to make the plant, and we're saying this paragraph is really important and we're going to change this sentence to make a slightly different function.
I see.
Whereas in the past you would just look at the cover of the book and say, well, this is a green book and this is a red book. Now we can actually understand what's going on.
Or a blue book, which
Yeah.
is full of smut, and you don't want that, do you? And we actually have been tinkering around with animal breeding for a very long time, haven't we?
That's right, and I think you described it really well, because breeding, the concept of breeding is really trying to use the animal with the best genetic material and make them breed for the next generation. But how do you identify which animals have the best genetic material? Before we didn't know. Now we can actually look in the DNA, so we have much better technologies to actually look at the DNA, make use of the data to identify the good animals.
So that the breeding of racehorses is the thing that everyone thinks of, and how you get these genetically magnificent beasts.
It's a good example.
Yeah.
Dogs is another one, or cattle. Cattle, we have made so much change in them. So, for example, in some areas in the world, in order to produce 100 liters of milk in a day, you need 100 cattle. In the Western world here, we need 4 cattle. Four. Yeah. So this has been achieved mainly through breeding and management. So huge achievements.
That is an incredible achievement. Okay, so we've actually got some questions coming in. So we have another video, but before we come up to that, I'm going to ask you all of this question, because I think it is something that a lot of people worry about. Should we try to shift away from monoculture systems altogether? I'm going to start on the plant side of the room. Do you think so? I mean, monoculture systems, do we have to shift away from them, or?
In terms of widening the germplasm pool, do you think, or?
I think so. I think we should do we need to vary the way we grow food?
I suppose it depends on the crop that you're looking at, but certainly we'd need to widen up the germplasm we have available for certain crop species. For if the question is talking about vegetative repropagation of certain crops like bananas or sugarcane, then yes, those are probably more in danger of being, I suppose, overcome by diseases or things like that. So yeah, absolutely, whatever tools we can do to widen that would be good.
Yeah, because I mean, we have horrible images in front of us of famines that have been caused because people were growing the same thing.
Yeah.
So is it something that we should remember and we should stay away from?
It's something that we've been moving towards doing monoculture because we can do a single machine to harvest an entire field.
Yeah.
And so mechanization is really easy, and it's very difficult if you're growing multiple species in the same field to harvest each one separately. So harvesting peas versus corn requires completely different machinery. But there are a lot of populations and a lot of farmers around the world who do intercrop, which is combining 2 different or 3 different species in the same field. And it's very beneficial for the soil. And so that in some environments, it's an excellent way of farming. It just can be more labour intensive.
Oh, because you see the next question, actually, Andrea, goes straight over to you. Can livestock be made more sustainable?
Oh, certainly. Yes.
Okay, that's the answer.
I think so. In the past, so especially after the World Wars, we needed to produce a lot of food quickly.
Yeah.
Right. So the key was make livestock grow faster, produce more food faster.
So we can make more spam.
Exactly.
Whatever that is.
Now I think our challenge is different, right? So we want them to be more adapting, more resilient to all the diseases and the climate change. We want them to produce better food faster, more efficient, and have less environmental footprint, so less methane emissions in cattle. And all that is possible in just diversifying the breeding goal.
Isn't the cow methane situation, that was what was damaging the ozone layer? Or do I make that up? I think I managed it. But I remember it was something to do with cows. When you said methane, that's very good, but what we're actually talking about here is farting. I mean, it's scientific. Can we just say hi to Joshua, who joined us yesterday, and he's back in. Hi Joshua, get your questions in. Don't forget, if you've got a question that you want to ask, please just get into the chat box function on YouTube and just send your questions in, and the panel are here to answer your questions. And before we go on to the second video, because this is a question that directly leads to that, is food insecurity more to mismanagement of food supply, or the fact that we just don't grow enough in the first place? I'm going to start ask you that, put that to you, Annis.
That's a really interesting question. So we have a limited amount of land space that's suitable for growing crops. So we will hit a maximum where there is no more space for us to grow the vegetable crops or grains that sustain the world. So most cereal crops, they provide 50% of the global calories. So that's wheat, rice, maize, barley, and they're almost maximum land mass right now that we can use. So a lot of it is, where are we sending that grain that we produce? Yeah. Is it of high quality for food, for human consumption, or is it for animal consumption? And then on the storage stage, and then through processing, through transport to destination, are we losing more and more of the time? So I think it's a problem from not even just from production, but also at the stage of every stage of food chain.
But Alistair, you're talking about creating plants practically. So do you think?
So if we're talking about the supply chain issues and transport, that is one major issue with food security. But in terms of keeping track with the yields that varieties have sort of been improving over the past since the 1960s, since the Green Revolution, we have been seeing the population growth keep track with our ability of our varieties to improve their yields. That's starting to fall off in various places in the world, depending on the crop. So you find places like Asia, where rice crops are being cultivated extensively. You get this plateau effect now, trying to keep track with the population growth, which is going to continue going up until about 2050. It's going to become more and more troublesome. So, yeah, I think what we need to think about now is how we're going to deal with that particular issue of keeping that yield plateau going up, while also having to think about all these other issues with transport. And the case we're running out of, we're sort of trying to do fossil fuel reductions as well.
Yes, I like the use of your word troublesome. Yeah. and the fact that you did point out there, Annis, that we're running out of space.
Yeah.
So that is quite troublesome. And then can you have cattle, like food animals? Is it mismanagement that means that we don't have enough, or?
Partly. I think one has to ask seriously hard question, how is the land we have at the moment available best used? I don't think that's solved at the moment. Not having any livestock is probably not a good solution, because I think 2/3 of all agricultural land is marginal, so it meant it can't be used for human consumption. So, for example, cattle are very good converter of grass. We can't eat grass, cattle can. The same with sheep. So I think, yeah, it's a tough question. How do you manage the land appropriately? But not having any livestock is probably not the solution.
So, and you don't think it's like mass fish farming or something like that? Because my kids will not eat fish, so.
I mean, aquaculture is also a solution to mitigate the wild farming, right, of the fishing of fish. So, yeah. Aquaculture has a big potential.
Do you know, just before we go on to look at and how your areas of research will help us, Alistair, you mentioned it twice, and for those who are not entirely au fait with your line of research, you talked about the Green Revolution. So for those who are not entirely familiar with what that was, can you give us a quick recap?
Wow, okay. A brief recap of the Green Revolution. It dates back to a gentleman called Norman Borlaug in the 1960s, who I think he was a researcher in the States who moved to Mexico, and he developed some new wheat varieties, apologies, which were slightly more dwarfed, but with that dwarfing came more robustness and also high yields. And I think during that decade, he doubled the food production, or the wheat yield production in Mexico, and then he took that across to Pakistan and India as well. And it ended up
doubled it?
Yeah, absolutely, in a decade. And that has been going up because of the techniques he's developed. That yield increase has been going up almost like Moore's law with computers over the last few decades. But we can only go so far with those novel breeding approaches that have been used. We're having to start to augment those now with other things like gene editing and
yes, that's right. So you
yeah.
build on the bricks of the Green Revolution. In
yes,
your
exactly. So Norman's work was incredible. He's actually accredited with saving more lives than most modern medicine has, because he produced so much more food. From what we know from his work, we identified the genes that are in there, and then it's been incorporated into modern breeding programs where we use methods of looking at the DNA to say this plant has the type of gene that we want it to have, and it will be dwarf and it will produce a higher yield, and we've been able to take it across all of the cereals to do that.
But both of you alluded that things have levelled off, or you saw a peak, there's something developing, something else is happening. So this is why the future of food is suddenly scarily prescient. Now, fortunately, the lovely people who saw earlier have made another video so that we can find out how the areas of research, they're going to help us, they're going to make us look at sustainably producing food in the future. So let's take a look at that.
One of the biggest challenges for plant scientists at the moment is how to boost crop yields in line with the growing population. And a lot of aspects of crop improvement have already been realised. For example, partitioning of biomass into yield, or designing plant architecture to intercept the most radiation from the sun. So a lot of the crops we eat have already been optimised almost to the point of the maximum optimisation. But one thing that hasn't managed to be improved yet really is photosynthesis itself. So actually, of all the solar radiation that hits a plant, for example, in the C3 plants such as rice and wheat, soybean, only about 3 or 4% of it is actually converted into biomass. And we hope that by putting a carbon concentrator, a CO2 concentrating mechanism into those plants, we will actually be able to directly improve the efficiency of photosynthesis, and then that will be translated directly into improved crop yields.
Food from livestock that produce large amounts of meat or milk has a smaller environmental footprint than food from less productive animals. If an animal gets sick, its productivity tends to fall. So any gene editing that we can do to reduce the probability of that happening has to be a good thing. Now, this is a win-win. It's good for animal welfare, it's good for farmers because they have less risk of production loss, and it's good for the general populace because we use fewer antimicrobials in a farming environment.
One project I'm involved with at the moment is investigating how local breeds of chickens in different parts of Africa have been able to adapt to their environment. Now, these birds tend to be pretty resilient and able to withstand environmental challenges such as high temperatures and water scarcity, for example. However, unfortunately, these birds are not as productive as standard commercial birds and are slower growing and lay fewer eggs. So, if we can understand the genes that make them able to adapt to their environment, we can help support local farmers choose the most productive birds for their local area.
So increased food crop production is not easy because the land available for agriculture is decreasing due to the urban spread and climatic change. So we need to increase food production, and the only way that we can do this is reduce losses by biotic and abiotic stresses. So, and in this context is why we need plants more resistant to pathogens to decrease those losses by all these diseases.
One of the amazing things about plants is that they're still able to protect themselves against pathogens even after they've been harvested. So sitting in your fridge or on a supermarket shelf, they're still able to protect themselves against fungal or bacterial pathogens or viruses, which means that the area that I'm studying should help to improve their shelf life, because I'll be looking to boost their protection after they've been harvested. Because up to 50% of all vegetable crops, particularly leafy salads, that are harvested never get eaten by a consumer. So if we can reduce that amount of food loss or food waste, then that will make our farming more sustainable in the future.
Aquaculture or fish farming is growing rapidly as wild fish stocks steadily decline, and it's without doubt an increasingly important source of healthy food for humans. The problem is that sustainably farming fish around the world on larger and larger scales is a big challenge, due in part to infectious diseases that are occurring as outbreaks on fish farms. My area of research is providing knowledge as well as tools that can be used to breed fish with improved disease resistance, to rear fish with improved health and welfare, and also to reduce the spread of disease that's associated with aquaculture and fish farming.
By 2050, the human population is expected to reach about 9.7 billion, and feeding all of these people poses significant challenges to food production. So we require environmentally sustainable improvements to farm animal health and welfare, including changes in management and breeding strategies. So high-resolution maps of animal genomes can help with this. For example, some breeds of sheep, they shed their wool, reducing the cost of the industry in terms of shearing, and then also improving animal welfare. And other breeds of sheep, they can thrive in the environments and climates that we might expect in the UK in coming decades. And these characteristics of these breeds of sheep will be under genomic control, and understanding this genomic control is a powerful tool for informing future breeding and management practices.
That was incredible. Some of the takeaways I took from that, the fact that animals, the things can still fight, harvested food still fights off infections after it's been harvested. That's amazing. So I mean, we have an apple tree, and I had 4 apples off it. And so they're still fighting off pathogens even after they've been harvested.
Yeah, if you think about it, plants have a skin as well, just like us, and when you take them off the tree, they still have that skin. So unless it's been pierced, the pathogens aren't going to get in there for the rot.
Absolutely amazing. That was really interesting, absolutely fascinating. We've got so many questions coming in. Do remember that the question, bring them in on the chat box, and we'll just fling them into the panel and let's see where we go, because this is going back, Jessie's sent a question, and it's going back to something that we touched on earlier, but we're going to get a little bit more into this, I think. Thanks, Jessie, for the question. I'd love to know everyone's opinion on the concept of integrated livestock management as a tool to improve soil health and increase farm biodiversity. Bam, straight over there, I think.
Well, this is not my main area of research, so I have to admit that. So I'm not the expert on that. it's certainly part of the solution. So livestock is part of the life cycle with plants. So for example, livestock can feed on plant products that otherwise would go to waste. So for example, I think the skin of certain hulses you can feed to cattle, and it's very nutritious for cattle, and otherwise you wouldn't know what to do with that. So integration means similar to circular. So you're using components of one system, crop system, plant system, to also in the other system, or like manure from animals as fertilizers. And again, there is a lot of research going on in that field. It's not my area, but it's a very important area.
Well, I mean, it's the old mixed farming model, isn't it? And which a lot of people feel was better than the monoculture that we see now. What would you?
I would say that the more we can use our waste products from the different parts of agriculture to support and feed each part, the better we can, because then we'll end up with a reduced waste system, and that's better for the environment in every way possible.
So you're going to start feeding cows on algae?
You could actually, so there's lots of ways to start integrating your waste and actually doing better things with it. So there's some interesting work being done, particularly in Scotland, with using anaerobic digesters or the effluents from whiskey production plants, and then feeding those to algae or other sort of microbes, and then producing useful products from them. So you could actually take those algae and feed them to cattle, and it's a very high protein diet.
Wow.
Or you could use them for producing other products if you could.
So you're taking
them.
the waste from whiskey and you're feeding it to algae, and you're
Yeah,
getting algae.
it's very rich in sugars and things like that. So you can imagine they'd be quite delicious to algae.
There's active research going on for reducing methane emission in cattle by actually feeding them algae. So that's a good example.
That's
right?
a really good. Yes. So we're back to the farting cows, are we?
I stop there.
Stop discussing that any further. Actually, and Lucy, thank you. This is a really interesting question, especially for the UK, especially with what you've just said, Alistair, about Scotland. Thanks, Lucy. Should we be focusing more on self-sufficiency with food production rather than relying heavily on imports? I think I've just pointed out to you that I grew my own apples for a week. But the thing is, Alistair, you were talking about that, and that's a really interesting way of using a byproduct of a big Scottish industry. But can we be self-sufficient, or will we always have to import huge amounts of food?
We don't, for the population that we have in the UK, we don't have the capacity to be able to produce enough food for everyone in the UK.
Even if you get really clever with algae?
Unfortunately not. Yeah. Because if you think about the amount of water that's used to feed, produce food, and you think about how much water comes down in Scotland is actually a water importer.
Right.
Yeah. So we actually, in terms of the amount of water that gets given to crops to grow them up, the amount of water that gets brought into Scotland every year is positive. So we are actually taking in more water than we use here.
What about the rain?
Yeah, exactly. You think about that. But it's just that we don't have the land mass to produce that much food, so we do need to import.
Presumably we would never be able to produce enough meat, enough animals.
Potentially not, but I think there is a case, do we need to import lamb from New Zealand, or could we, buy more local? Again, I think that's something that needs to be looked at.
See if we could.
There's a lot of improvement that can be made all along the production chain. It's a good question.
Yeah. So it's about improvements to the production chain. You would. So thank you for that. And then now, Hayley, this is a question. This is an excellent question. Thank you. How do we reconcile the ethical concerns about modifying animal genetics for our benefit? People are growing anxious about the genetic changes that people are suggesting. Do you feel it's ethical?
There's a big debate. I think one has to be careful by saying what kind of changes are we making. So you have to be aware that there's a lot of natural genetic variation in animals already. So mutations are coming up all the time naturally. So if you now make small changes to a gene of an animal, you basically accelerate, you could argue you accelerate what nature would have done anyway, because mutations are happening. You just do it more precise. Now, of course, you need to have more research to see what are you actually doing. A lot of research is needed to make sure that you're not causing more danger.
So there needs to be more discussion and more debate just to make sure that we're not, I don't know, creating a Frankenstein's monster. I mean, your algae could suddenly become massive and suddenly devour Glasgow.
Well, it's similar to us in terms of in plants. Like if we could have a gene editing approach where we could modify the plant so that you had to provide less fertilizer, similarly to produce giving livestock less antibiotics. Would that be more ethical? What would be better for the plants, for the human population consuming those products, and the actual quality of existence? So I think these are things that scientists are asking themselves all the time. It's not like we just want to go out there and make Frankenstein things. We need to balance these things and make sure what's actually best and most efficient and most ethically correct.
But there has been a huge debate, hasn't there, about plants and genetic modification. And do you feel that we're reaching a point where we have to say we need to park our ethics for a while?
That's a really good question. So actually, one of the big announcements from the UK government in the last month was that gene editing using CRISPR-Cas9 technology is a technology that we will be allowed to use in crop production, because this technology basically takes this book that we know, all of the words in it, and you make spelling changes to the words to correct them or to slightly change the meaning of the word. Whereas the genetic modification, which is what a lot of people have been most concerned about, is taking in and putting a new page into the book. So you can't necessarily say that you've kept the story the same in that case, but if you're just changing a spelling, then it is staying the same.
But it's just a tiny tweak.
Yes.
It's just a tiny tweak. Because the next question kind of feeds into that, and the fact that we may have to quietly go, ethics are nice, but we'll get them next Tuesday. Because Joshua from yesterday, hi there, Joshua, this question feeds directly into it. Some of the people talking about soil degradation have asserted that we have 60 to 80 years of agriculture left under current systems. What are your thoughts on this topic? Do you think... You're nodding in such a way as if to go, yeah.
Topsoil is something that's actually fairly understudied, but the loss of it is a major problem. So with the mechanical farming that we use at the moment, we do a lot of turnover of the soil at different parts of the year. And it means that we're loosening up the soil, and when it rains, the soil runs off into the water systems and then disappears, and we don't get that soil back.
You see, this is something that I don't understand because I'm quite stupid. So there is topsoil, which is this layer. And why is that layer so important?
That's the nutrient-rich area. So when plant leaves fall off the plant, they'll decompose, and the nutrients will leach into the top layer of soil.
And so when it's the way that we're using it just now, we churn it up constantly. So the soil that's underneath it is much less.
Yeah, it's usually got more stone or clay, or more compacted.
Yeah, totally.
So that's why in some gardens, if you move into a new house and you've got a garden and it's very poor growing, it's probably because the topsoil is really bad and it's never been looked after. So there's been a lot of research done in crop sciences about how can we start reducing this loss of topsoil and the loss of nutrients from the topsoil. So new methods are coming in where we're leaving the straw in the fields longer. So we're cutting it slightly higher off the ground and leaving it in the field and turning that into the soil using ploughing to increase the nutrients in the soil.
Isn't that where it would be better to have animals on that soil? And after you've harvested it, I don't know, let the sheep... Yeah, let the sheep out.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah, and we've solved the whole problem, everybody. And then, Alistair, do you think we've only got 60 to 80 years of agriculture left?
Of agriculture?
Some people have actually said that the soil degradation is getting so bad that we just can't use it anymore.
So soil is actually, it's not really my field, so I don't think that much about it, but I'm aware that it is also a massive problem. And just in terms of the nutrients that we do supply to crops, like phosphates and nitrogen, things like that, are things to start worrying about as well.
Right.
But that's slightly different from actually the quality of the topsoil layer, so yeah.
So we need to keep the topsoil bare.
Yes.
Right, so we come up with a great idea, which is we're going to cut it and then we're going to unleash the sheep. Just, in fact, that's
and don't forget the fertilizers. So animals do bring fertilizers in.
Yes. So when you say fertilizer, do you mean natural fertilizer?
Yes, natural.
Yes, I rather thought you did. And in fact, because Ian from yesterday, hi Ian, has said, what is your recommendation to rebuild our soils? What about fixing carbon using biochar as a soil improver? First of all, what's biochar?
Again, not really my field. It's a mechanism where you could take like biomass, and then using high pressure and heat, you can turn it into basically whatever product you want. And Biochar is one of the products that you can get from that. So it's really compressed, high density carbons and things like that.
Super fertilizer.
Yes, potentially, and potentially sustainable as well if you have the capital investment in terms of making it.
So so how would you rebuild your soil? I mean, you've talked about keeping the topsoil where it is, but can we look after the topsoil once it's there better?
Yeah, so using natural fertilizers, so manure is good, but it does come with some of the side effects as well. Doing crop rotation with legumes like peas and beans, that's great because that provides nutrients to the soil. And then changing some of the farming practices, so instead of doing an early ploughing, doing it later in the year, waiting for when you put fertiliser on at different times. And farmers in the UK are doing this already. It's been a problem that they've very, very much thought about and have started to work on.
It's quite interesting that you mentioned crop rotation, because that was that's what changed the world when they could grow more crops in cycle to get more out of it. See, I did stay awake during that particular lesson at school. Oh, God, it was difficult. I really should have met my teacher. In fact, we can now go into the solutions. We've looked at some of the questions that we've had are about the challenges. So there are big challenges, and we've actually got another video that's been produced, which is really exciting, in the areas of what are the big challenges for producing food in a changing climate, which is what we're facing just now. So let's take a look and see what they can come up with.
So I think some of the challenges that we're going to face with a rapidly changing climate are likely to be around the increased stresses that animals have to face. So these could be, for example, associated with heat stress, where you get reduced productivity and reduced health status of the animals. Or it could be around exposure to new diseases as diseases move to new locations because the climate is changing. Anything that we can do with genome editing that allows us to move well understood traits from one breed to another rapidly has to be a useful thing to do. Now, I don't pretend that genome editing is a panacea for all the problems that we're going to face, but it certainly does have the potential to contribute to the tools that we have to face the challenges of today, but also the challenges that we don't know yet around the corner tomorrow.
Changing climate ultimately means more extremes of weather, and the crops that we're going to be producing for the future need to be robust against these changing patterns and extreme patterns. And one of the things we're hoping with the plants that we're developing, which have this CO2 concentrating mechanism designed based on the aquatic algae, is that they'll have improved water use efficiency and nitrogen use efficiency. So we think that that will be a way of ensuring against these climatic fluctuations that we're almost bound to see increasingly going forward.
If chickens are kept in an environment to which they're not well suited, then their productivity decreases. So as our climate changes, we need to be able to understand the genetics of resilient and sustainable chickens and other livestock. If we know the genes that enable animals to thrive in their local environments, we can design selective breeding programs to produce the healthiest and most productive chickens for local climates.
Fish are cold-blooded, and that means their body temperature and their health is strongly affected by water temperature. And as global temperatures rise, so will water temperatures, and this will change which fish species can be farmed in different parts of the world, depending on their adaptations. Also, certain pathogenic organisms may also thrive in warmer and more unpredictable environments, making emerging infectious diseases an increasing threat to aquaculture. But I have to say we're well placed to tackle these challenges scientifically.
So there are two main areas which I think will be a challenge for the future, one of which will be integrating behavioural changes with science when it comes to post-harvest food waste. So making consumers make better choices in terms of what they buy and what they throw away, combined with improving the health of the plant post-harvest, should reduce that food waste in the future. But also, particularly when it comes to climate change, there will be fewer inputs that we can put into growing crops, less soil, less fertilizer. So we need to start now preparing what our crops will look like in the future to prepare them for a lower input agriculture.
We have all these new pests and pathogens that are also threatening the crop production. So one of the ways to tackle the environment situation that we have at the moment is making plants more resistant, more productive to pathogens and different stresses. And will help in different ways. One way is because we don't need pesticides anymore, because plants will be more resistant, or will have a better way to fight pathogens. But also we are going to increase the productivity by reducing losses, and therefore we need less land. And this is really important, because in this moment, like wild spaces are threatened by agriculture. So if we can make the land that we have more productive, we could also protect those environmental areas.
The UK sheep industry relies on just a small number of production breeds. And these breeds might not be the most suitable for the climate in the UK in coming decades. And as such, one way that we can use genomic information is to look at which breeds might be the most suitable. And often this could be, for example, our local and native breeds of sheep that cope better with changing climates because of their characteristics. And the opposite is actually true in sub-Saharan African countries. So in countries like Cameroon, smallholder farmers, they actually rely on a large number of local breeds. However, in those countries, the challenges are largely around social and economic and political issues that mean setting up community-managed breeding programs is difficult. So by recording and conserving genomic diversity, or the genomic maps of farmed animals across the globe, we aim to maintain a resource that will allow us to tackle the challenges of changing climates in the future.
I was annoyed at a cow, so I punched it. So it just got the way. That was absolutely fascinating. It's amazing. I love the fact that we don't even think about the breeds of animals that we need, but we will need to look at the care and the longevity of those animals, and how much attention is being put on their welfare as well.
Yeah, I think this is one of the big challenges now, right? So we don't only have net zero, we also have zero hunger. So we need to feed enough people, that there should be no more hungry people in the world. And then we also have the increasing awareness of animal welfare. We don't want to do what we do at the cost of the animal either. Mm-hmm. So I think this trade-off, getting it right, this balance is very difficult, yeah.
It is, but I also like the mention of local livestock, looking again at what was there originally and taking another look at it again, which is really interesting.
Yeah, because often they are adapted to the environment, right?
Oh yeah.
So especially Africa, for example, chicken in Africa. I don't know if you've seen African chicken, but I mean they are amazing. They look amazing. They are really colorful, and they have adapted. So there is evidence that they are more resistant to the diseases there, because they have, of course, adapted to the climate. So we can use that information to potentially also make our chicken more disease resistant.
That's astonishing. Yeah, Scottish sheep. Have you ever seen Scottish sheep in the rain? That's the best way to see a Scottish sheep. It just looks so Scottish, so wet and miserable. And it's just, I live here and I'm wet and I don't like it. There are so many questions coming in, so let's crack on. Bantu, now this is a really interesting question. Given what we've just seen, what would it take to scale? So I'm going to start with you, Alistair. What would it take to scale the work you do in your labs to create more resilient and sustainable versions of animals' crops and make them accessible to farmers and to the market?
So that's a classic sort of lab to field question, I suppose. Yeah. I think it usually always starts with doing things on small scale in labs. So we'll start with Petri dishes, and we'll go to small growth cabinets. And then after that, we might go to small field trials. And this is when you start, for example, researchers in SS have done this quite well with genes to improve photosynthesis, where they've looked at improving wheat for example, and they've seen the enhancements happening in the glasshouse, and then they've taken those lines and taken them to Rothamsted, which is one of the premier places to do field trials in the UK. And they start testing these things on much larger scales. And I think after that, it's about finding a particular distributor, one of your major agricultural companies, to then take on the seed stocks from those and then sending them out to the world. So that can take several years, if not decades. But
decades.
Yeah, you need to breed your improvements into a particular variety of the time. So it does take time.
Is that the kind of timescales you're looking at as well?
Yeah, exactly. So most of the lines that we have available for farmers right now have taken decades to develop, because when you want to make a new variety, say you've got one that's very short and one that's got very high grain size, you cross the two plants together, but then you have a mix of the two, and you actually want a short plant with high grain yield. So you have to then take that plant and cross it to the short plant, for example, and then take all of the individuals that have the big seed, and you do this multiple times. It takes years, because each generation is one generation a year in the UK for growing it in the field.
And of course, when you come to animals, you are looking, decades of research.
Yeah, but the breeding doesn't start really, the genomic or genetic selection doesn't start really in the lab. We are using the power of data. So it's actually using the data, making more sense of the data we collect. You collect data on thousands or hundreds of thousands of animals, and based on that information you can identify these are the genetically the better ones. These are the ones that are less likely to become infected or get a disease. So it's also the power of data. You don't need to start everything from the lab. You can actually get a lot of information from field data, and I guess it's the same in the crop field. It's the same there.
Because what you said earlier about these funky African chickens, I mean, basically the planet is your lab.
That's right.
You're looking all over the planet, and
right.
what works, what here, and what works. So in fact, things are getting to market perhaps slightly quicker, or we're getting more efficient at it. So
yeah, because we can also use now better technologies like like this microscope. We can actually now look into the DNA of animals. Before we just had only the data. Now we have technology and data. So we get more precise.
So and the next question is kind of leads into that again, which is well done all our viewers for getting these questions so sequentially correct. That's lovely. John's asked us, he said there's much discussion about land area running out, which you mentioned at the beginning in this bit, but hydroponics and vertical farming, which is what I attempted to do so spectacularly failingly, can produce crops like lettuce and tomatoes very efficiently. Can produce, not in my case. Should we transition towards this format? Should we have hydroponics? And
it is something that's being developed a lot at the moment. So there are some fantastic companies that are taking over old warehouses or air raid tunnels or things like that, and they're converting them into a space where we can grow high value crops. The problem is that they require, you have to put in light, and you have to put in temperature control, and you have to put in the nutrients, and it costs quite a lot to do that. So at the moment it only pays off to do this for high value salads and radishes and things like that. Whereas if we were to do it with wheat, we wouldn't necessarily, at the moment, with the resources that we have and the technology we have, develop enough to be able to produce a loaf of bread.
I think it's really great because there's a way you can be quite sustainable in terms of like the fluids, the fertilizers that you put into your nutrients that you supply your vertical farm with. You can recycle those because you can keep the whole thing in a closed unit. So that's fantastic, and you've got a lot of control in the situation. You can grow things to look exactly like a consumer wants. And all tastes, for example, if you're looking at different kinds of lettuce leaves. But yeah, as Annis is saying, I think that will only work for a small portion of. It's not going to work for our staple crops like wheat, maize, rice, and soy.
Hydroponics, what you said earlier about water, that's probably not a starter either on a massive scale. No, guess not. And there's only one flavour of lettuce, and that's lettuce. Because of what you say, Alistair. And John has he's come in with another question. Transgenic crops, am I saying that? Transgenic crops have incredible potential, but there's a lot of hesitation around the sale of GMOs. Yes. Do you think UK legislation and public perception will catch up to the science, or is it all academic? Now, GMOs were a thing that was very much flavour of the month a couple of years ago, but seems to have slid off the radar slightly. So do you think people are anxious about them, and how would you allay that fear?
That's a really good question. So when I was growing up in the 90s, there was a big furore over GMO, and that was because there was just really poor communication, and I think we've got much better about what we mean when we say transgenic plants versus gene-edited plants, and they're very different technologies. So when you are gene editing, you are making a single change to a gene, and that means that you're changing the spelling of that gene to make it stop doing its function or do its function better. But when you are making a GMO, a genetically modified organism, you're usually taking a new gene that could be from a sister plant or from a sister species animal, or it could be from another organism completely, and you're putting it into that plant. And that's what most people are concerned about. And we do need regulation, and we do need testing to make sure that those organisms are safe for consumption or safe for the environment. But the gene editing, as the recent review of gene editing in the UK has come to the conclusion, gene editing is just effectively a cleaner way than we currently make mutations in our crops, for example.
I think you spoke that word mutation.
Yeah, it sounds scary. Yeah, but it's just making changes.
So does the word synthetic.
It is a bit semantic, because we say mutation, you can say modification as well, to be fair. It's just, if you look at Cas9, which is the major gene editing protein, this is the thing that causes those changes in spelling to occur. This technology has been taken up by many countries already. If you look at the States, if you look at Brazil, even South Africa, these are countries which are investing, they have many, many thousands of hectares already invested in growing crops which have these, well, they have the potential to grow those crops there. It's just really, really exciting, I think, from us in terms of the pace at which CRISPR research has come along, this gene editing research has come along in the last decade. So I mean, just this, I was having a look this morning, some of the papers that have come out of CRISPR. We have wheat varieties with improved grain. We have rice with new fragrances. We have bananas with greater resistance to diseases. We have soy plants which have more seeds per pod. And all of these things for breeding would take you decades to do, but with a simple knowing from the big data that we have about genomes, you can go in and change a single gene a little bit, and these things occur. Just tweak them. It's magic. Yeah.
That's extraordinary. And this question, you sort of touched on this earlier, Andrea, but it's from Noor, again from Jeste Heiner, and she said, should institutions pay attention to lessons from native populations' traditional agricultural approaches, or do these tend to be specific to smaller community contexts and difficult to universalise? You suggested that looking at the world, looking globally, you were finding solutions that could be applied globally.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, these rare breeds often, they have really adapted to the environment, and you know, we learn what does it take, what are the genes that are important. So there's cattle in different cattle who are tick resistant, for example, and in our cattle here are not. So it's really learning from. There's natural variation happening, and I mean, gene editing is just really, so we talked about mutations, right? They occur all the time naturally, and we need them. And you know, this is how we improve things. So this is a good thing. Mutation, variation is a good thing, and we need to look more in getting the best out of the different components.
So really, trying to keep things the same is not a good idea at all.
No, and nature is not like that. Nature changes all the time.
Yes, yes, like, you know, like your skin ages, changes. It's not good. Let's not go there. The next question that I've got here, it's from Rob Wilson, Andrea's husband. Hi. And will the technology of more efficient food production you're talking about here keep up with the substantial climate changes projected over the coming decades? I mean, you're Alistair, you went. You're talking about foods and crops that you're creating now, but we might be what to be looking at in the future. Do you think you've future-proofed your work?
I think we're actually, I mean, everyone talks about the future in terms of securing food security in the future, and the problem is actually already taking over. I mean, if you go back to some of the original food crises that happened over the last 10 years, the 2008 rice crisis, people probably aren't that familiar with. They had a massive crisis in Asia of a few bad seasons, and then the prices of rice skyrocketed, and then farmers couldn't actually buy back the rice grains. They needed to regrow rice the next season. A huge problem. And this has happened in various places around the world. That's one of the more major examples of the last decade and a half. But we're already here. We're already in a place where food security is a major problem, and it's going to start getting worse if we don't integrate all the tools that we currently have available to us. So I think we can try our best to keep up. and it's going to be challenging. But I think the best chances we have is just to use all the tools we have available.
Can I just check that your barley is being future-proofed for whisky production?
I would say probably, but the way that breeders work is that they are always looking to the future. What they're currently producing right now, they're done with that, and the next one they're always looking forward. And if you speak to any crop breeder, they're always saying, okay, well, what's the next thing that we're looking for? What's the next disease that we're looking for to try and get resistance to?
We're going to have to crack on through these next few questions here, so I'm just going to, this is really good one from Ian. So how do we scale up permaculture to large-scale farming with reduced needs for high labour inputs? I mean, you have to look after this stuff, don't you? So
Yeah.
how do you scale up permaculture?
Um,
So permaculture is just constantly going.
Yeah.
keeping it going.
It's hard when you've got a climate like ours. When you have a proper winter, there is a limited number of plants that will actually grow in that environment. And in some places it's even worse, where you have lots of snow on the ground. You're not going to be able to grow things throughout the year easily without massive energy inputs and in a big greenhouse, effectively.
And so just basically, if we could just turn Scotland into a giant greenhouse, I think actually you'd probably get quite...
Climate change may do that for you.
Climate change, yeah, that's true. Yeah, but I mean, you know, Rob's out there with algae, and Alistair's busy doing something synthetic, so that'll be fine. And then there's another question before we come to the last question. This is thank you, Ian. This is very good. How do we complete the virtuous cycle of nutrients and minerals? How do we do this so they get returned back to the land? This would mean digesting sewage and getting food scraps back as fertilizers to the farmers. Of course, in Edinburgh, in all cities, the night soil men were very important at one time. They used to go around collecting exactly what that says and take it to the market gardens just outside Edinburgh. Are we going to go back to using human sewage on the land?
We already are.
Sorry?
We already are. So if you are around agricultural areas at certain times of the year, there'll be quite a pungent smell, and that is slurry from the sewage works. It's been treated, so there's no diseases in it, but it's all the high concentrated nutrients available.
Cleaned black water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alistair, your algae is looking more appealing.
They don't smell much better, but...
Is that what we do? Can you see that as a future? I mean, the food scraps back to farmers. Now, that was really during the Second World War, and virtually in every sort of like public kitchen, such as a canteen or a school, had bins for pigs, and that's what they used them for.
I mean, that's what is discussed in the circular economy, right? That it all goes back. I mean, you have to be careful. I work a lot in infectious disease, and from that point of view, it could be a massive problem. You know, it's not a quick, easy solution. You have to be very careful that you get rid of that. You know, we saw that in FM in diseases before. That, you know, when you feed animal food back to animals, that can cause where the BSE crisis was disastrous. So it's just an example. We have to be careful, but yeah, we need to look.
Right, the last question, and I'm going to go into this a quick fire round. What's the greatest threat to global food security from climate change? Will the planet dry up? Will it overheat? What will happen? Alistair?
I suppose fluctuating climate, really. It's if you look at the capacity of the germplasm we have in our crops and the trajectory of the variance, as Annis was saying, of what crop farmers expect to be using in the next decade, if you have massive changes in I suppose CO2 levels and temperature levels and water availability, that's just going to wreak havoc with our capacity to produce as much food as we need. So I think the fluctuating environment is the biggest problem.
I'd say it's the short-term changes. So within the UK, we've seen in the last few years extreme drought and extreme floods and a lot of snow that people aren't used to. And considering that crops take several months to grow, they're experiencing all of that. So we can maybe generate a line that's able to tolerate being submerged for a period of time, but then is that plant also going to be able to cope with a severe drought in the summer when it's making its grain as well? And that's probably one of the major challenges, is to get a plant that can be resilient to all of that and all of the diseases and everything else that come with it.
The same for livestock counts exactly the same, and it's thought that climate change brings in new pathogens, new diseases too quickly. Animals have not adapted for that. And I think we shouldn't forget the threat of human behavior. Maybe, you know, we make the wrong decisions. So I think part of the puzzle also is, are we making the right decisions that are evidence-based, or are we just basing it on emotions or panicking? So I think one has to be careful that the decisions are scientifically sound, evidence-based, and cool.
So there's a good phrase to use for climate change: just be cool. let's be cool. But the future of food is something I think that's going to exercise many minds over the next decade, and it's been fascinating to look into the windows of what's being done. I'm still reeling slightly about the discovery about black water, but I'm okay now, and I'm still slightly worried about the effect of methane farting on the planet. But that's been absolutely riveting. Thank you to our fabulous panel. If there was an audience here, they would be applauding and cheering, and so I shall do it for you. Thank you very much. That was absolutely riveting. Thank you so much. Now don't forget, and thank you for all your questions. They were absolutely incredible. They certainly got the conversation and the debate spinning around. We're all relieved to discover, however, that the future of Scots whisky production is secure. Tomorrow evening, do join us again, because it's going to be on nature-inspired technologies at 8 o'clock. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm away for a sandwich now and some whiskey. Thanks.